In last lesson, we talked a little bit about these two different types of assessment. We described formative assessment as all the assessments that happen along the way, and we thought of a summative assessment as the peak learning experience in a unit. Let me address that just a little bit, because I don't think that calling it the peak learning experience is always accurate. Summative assessment isn't necessarily the end product for a unit, but it does mark the end of a learning cycle within a unit. You may have a unit which has multiple summative assessments within it because there are multiple skills that need to be focused on. The unit may be bound together by the topic or the subject matter, but you may have multiple learning points within it. To give you an example, we just did a unit on ancient civilizations in 6th grade INS. There was one summative assessment in which students conducted research on a particular civilization. But we had another summative assessment within that unit also. Students had to write a story as if it came from that particular culture. So within the unit, there was a learning cycle for both of those outcomes. And maybe you have one summative assessment for the entire unit, maybe you have more than one. The goal of this video is to build up an understanding of summative assessment in the context of unit planning. But to do this, we have to thoroughly understand what summative assessments are first. There's basically two philosophies of assessment out there. The first is that assessment is a measurement. It's something that you don't help the students through, because helping the students would not give you an accurate measurement of where the students are. The other philosophy of assessment is assessment as a continuation, as a motivated learning experience. In this philosophy, learning doesn't stop and then you give the assessment. Instead, students continually learn all the way through the assessment, all the way up until the day they turn it in. I think that these two philosophies accurately reflect the attitudes and goals of things like tests, which are more of a measurement tool, and things like process assessments, where students are conducting research or writing an essay over time in which they get continual feedback from the teacher. Ideally, learning does not stop at assessment. Good summative assessments push, continue, and motivate the learning to its next level. You'll sometimes hear people be critical of the idea that curriculum is teaching to the assessment. I couldn't disagree with this criticism more. The best summative assessments create realistic and high-level learning experiences that emulate the types of challenges students will find in real life. And I can't think of a better thing to align your curriculum to than that type of an experience. So our goal should obviously be to learn how to design that type of assessment. And in order to do that, we need to understand the difference between the types. The first type of summative assessment that we'll look at is the traditional assessment. This is the typical test, essay, or quiz that students might take. I think that every time you use a traditional assessment in a classroom, you need to know exactly why you're doing this. Performance and authentic assessments are way more dynamic and bring more real-world skills into the assessment. So why would you ever use a traditional assessment? If you're pressed for time to develop a particular skill, you may want to give a test so that you can really drill on that skill within a limited time frame. You may give a test or quiz specifically to focus on vocabulary building. Vocabulary is an integral part of a lot of areas of study, so there may be the occasional time where it's worthwhile to take the vocabulary and quiz on just that for a minute, just so that students can turn around and implement it better in context in a different assessment. Even if you are using a traditional assessment, there's ways that you can deepen it. Traditional question types, like multiple choice, fill in the blanks, word match, and defining terms, can be made more dynamic by putting them a little bit more in context. You can ask students to construct a paragraph using a list of terms. You can give them a number of steps in order to explain a concept, or you can pair definitions up with examples. These are just a few ways to elevate the level of thinking that you're asking students to do when they're sitting down to a test. The second assessment type that we'll talk about is the performance assessment. Performance assessments have multiple steps that cover multiple standards or skills, but they're often done in a single sitting, or maybe two. For example, students may be asked to read a text, annotate it, create a fact list from it, and then identify the key vocabulary and construct an essay. You can see that in this assessment, there's multiple steps and different skills built into each one of the steps. Another example is asking students to analyze a data set, create an important statistics list, prepare presentation slides, and add speaker notes outlining important points. Whether or not you have students actually give that presentation or not is up to you. In both of these examples, you can see how students are asked to perform a complex task. They're not just regurgitating information or selecting an answer from a list of options. It's a lot more involved than that. Students have to engage and interact with their knowledge. They have to perform a skill that asks them to apply the knowledge. Performance assessments are helpful because they emulate MYP and IB exams. It better prepares students for the type of exam that they're going to encounter in those settings. They also focus more on integrated skills, and they're very skills heavy. There's a lot of knowledge involved, but all of that knowledge is applied knowledge. And lastly, performance assessments provide an accurate measure in both their knowledge and their skills. I would say that the only weakness of a performance assessment is that it's a slightly better tool for measurement than it is as a learning experience. That brings us to our last type of summative assessment, which is the authentic assessment. Authentic assessments create a context around an assessment that puts students in a real-world situation. All of these assessments have scenarios in which students are put in. For example, students may be told that they're an assistant to a UN representative, and they have to deliver a briefing on a refugee situation in a particular country. Students may be told that they're the head of a nonprofit organization that is putting together a PSA campaign on a particular issue. Or students may be told that Disney has hired them to do background research on a particular culture or historical moment, and that their research is important to the development of the next movie. A good way to roll out authentic assessments like this is using what's called the GRASPS model. In this model, you outline the goal, the role, the audience, the situation, the performance, and the standards for each one of these scenarios for students. On the authentic assessments that my department uses here at TKS, I'd say that we use the GRASPS model on 100% of them, although it's not always explicit. There's a lot of reasons to use authentic assessment. One of the reasons is that it increases student investment. Students are really authentically excited when they pretend that they're doing something for Disney. Authentic assessments ask students to do the types of things that adults are really doing in a real-world dynamic workplace right now. Authentic assessments also focus more on higher order thinking because they require students to apply all their knowledge, not just repeat it back. They also push peripheral skills a little bit further, skills like communication and collaboration, ATL skills. Authentic assessment blends learning and assessment together. So students are learning from you as they go, and you're able to assess their ability to learn, not just what they know. That's because authentic assessment incorporates mistakes into it. It allows students to make mistakes. In fact, it even invites students to make mistakes and move their learning and their knowledge to that next level. So those are the three types of summative assessment. The key takeaway here is that your choice of assessment needs to be intentional and aligned to your learning goals. It should be used as a tool that extends learning whenever possible. I hope you guys enjoyed that and learned a lot about summative assessment. In the classroom this week, I'm going to ask you to develop a traditional assessment, a performance assessment, and a authentic assessment that all focus on the same skill or area of study. So just be mentally preparing that in your head and start thinking about how you're going to do it. I look forward to seeing you guys on Thursday, and I'll see you then. Take care. Have a good week.